My future mother-in-law reached across the table and slid my plate away from me, the one with the seared scallops I hadn't touched yet, and said loud enough for the whole rehearsal dinner to hear, "Sweetheart, the catering staff eats in the kitchen. You can find your spot back there." I didn't move. I watched her manicured fingers leave a faint smudge on the white linen, and I thought about how this woman had no idea that the firm catering her son's wedding, the one she'd bragged about, booking for 6 months, billed every invoice through a holding company that I owned. Let me back up, because the way you fall into a thing like this is never the way it looks from the outside. My name is Wynne. I was 31 that spring, and I'd been seeing Brennan for a little over a year. We met the boring way two adults meet now, through a friend of a friend at a rooftop thing in the West Loop, and I liked him because he didn't perform. He fixed his own bike, he texted back, he remembered that I hated cilantro and ordered around it without making it a whole personality. The first time he told me he loved me, we were standing in a Walgreens parking lot in the rain because his car wouldn't start, and I thought, okay, this one's real. What Brennan didn't fully understand, because I'd been deliberately vague about it, was what I did for a living. I told people I worked in operations. It was technically true. When I was 24, I'd taken $11,000 I'd saved bartending and waiting tables through college, and I'd bought a struggling commercial cleaning company off a guy who was dying to retire. One contract, 8 employees, a van with a busted transmission. I worked that thing like it owed me money, because it did. I learned payroll at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning. I learned which clients paid on time and which ones needed to be fired even when you were broke. By the time I was 29, that one cleaning company had become a parent company with 6 subsidiaries: hospitality staffing, event catering, facilities management, the unsexy backbone of every nice party in 3 states. I employed almost 400 people. I did not talk about it at dinner parties because the second people know you have money, they stop telling you the truth, and the truth was the only thing I'd ever been able to count on. Brennan's family was old Chicago money, or the kind of money that used to be money and now mostly traded on the memory of it. His mother, whom I'll call my future mother-in-law because I never once got the privilege of a warmer name, had grown up in a house with a name and married a man with a worse temper and a better trust fund. They lived in a house in Lake Forest that smelled like potpourri and resentment. The first time I met her, she asked me where I summered. I told her I didn't summer anywhere, that summer wasn't a verb where I came from, and she smiled the way you smile at a child who's said something almost clever. I want to be fair. I came into that family ready to like them. I'd lost my own mother at 19, ovarian cancer, fast and merciless, and there's a particular hunger you carry after that, an embarrassing readiness to be folded into somebody else's family. My mother had left me exactly one thing of value, a thin gold bracelet with a tiny enamel sparrow on the clasp. It wasn't worth much. She bought it for herself the first month she ever turned a profit at the little flower stand she ran, and she wore it every single day until the day she couldn't lift her arm any more. I wore it to the rehearsal dinner. I touched it under the table the whole night, like a worry stone. The rehearsal dinner was at a steakhouse downtown, the kind with leather booths and a wine list bound in something that used to be an animal. Brennan's older sister was there, the one who'd corrected my pronunciation of Worcestershire the first time we met and never let it go. His father held court at the head of the table, telling a story everyone had clearly heard before. And his mother had decided, somewhere between the salad and the entree, that the evening's entertainment would be me. It started small, a comment about my dress, that it was brave to wear something off the rack to an event like this, a question, asked with wide, innocent eyes, about whether I'd be comfortable at the country club for the wedding brunch, given the dress code. Then the sister chimed in, asking what exactly I did again, and when I gave my usual line about operations, the mother laughed and said, "Oh, she cleans things." Brennan, your wife scrubs toilets. How wonderfully humble. The table did that thing tables do. The little ripple of laughter that everyone joins so they won't be the one left out. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything, and I felt the small, cold thing happen in my chest that happens when you realize the person you love is going to choose comfort over you in a room full of his family. That's when she slid my plate away. That's the part I started with, because that's the part where something in me clicked over, quiet and final, like a deadbolt. Here's what made it almost funny. 3 weeks earlier, my operations director had forwarded me a flagged account, a wedding contract that had come in under the venue's preferred vendor agreement. Big package. Full catering, bar service, day of staffing, valet. The client name on the master contract was the venue, but the family of record, the people who'd signed the personal guarantee on the overage clause, because they wanted custom everything and wouldn't put down a big enough deposit, was a name I recognized, his mother's maiden family name, the same name that was, at that moment, monogrammed on the cocktail napkins. I hadn't said a word to Brennan. I told myself it was a coincidence, that it didn't matter, that I'd just quietly make sure the service was flawless and never mention it. I'm not a saint, but I genuinely had not planned to use it. I'd planned to be the bigger person, which is the most expensive thing a person can decide to be. But after she slid my plate away, I excused myself to the restroom. I stood in front of the mirror with my hands on the cold marble of the sink, and I texted my night operations manager, a woman named Tova, who'd been with me since the van with the busted transmission days and who I'd trust with my life. I asked her one question. I asked her to pull the signed personal guarantee on the wedding account and tell me whose signature was on it. She wrote back in 90 seconds. A photo of the document. And there it was, in the slightly too large cursive of a woman who liked to be seen, my future mother-in-law's signature, personally guaranteeing $38,000 of event overage against her own assets. Because the deposit she put down had been embarrassingly small relative to the champagne tower she demanded. I stood there a long time. I want to tell you I was calm. I wasn't. I was shaking, the specific shaking of a person who has been small in a room her whole life and has just remembered, suddenly and completely, that she is not small anymore. I went back to the table. I didn't make a scene. I sat down, I pulled my plate back in front of me, and I ate my scallops while she watched, and I think the not flinching unsettled her more than anything I could have said. The wedding was the next afternoon. I almost didn't go through with it, the reveal, I mean. I lay awake most of the night next to Brennan, who slept like a man with no enemies, and I ran the math on what it would cost me. Not the money. The other thing. Because I knew that the second they understood who I was, the warmth I'd been auditioning for my whole life would harden into something else. The careful, hungry politeness people show you when they want something. I'd never be folded into anything again. I'd be a resource. I'd be the fine print. But somewhere around 4 in the morning, I thought about my mother and her gold sparrow, working that flower stand with her hands cracking in January, and how nobody ever once slid her plate away because she would have looked at them like they'd lost their minds. And I decided I was done auditioning. The ceremony itself was fine. My sister-to-be looked beautiful and terrified, the way brides who are marrying into expectations always do. I cried a little, genuinely, because weddings get me. And then we moved to the reception, which my company was staffing, in a ballroom my company had set up, with food my company had cooked. Cocktail hour was where it tipped over. His mother, 3 glasses of Chardonnay in and feeling expansive, decided to introduce me to a cluster of her friends. She put her hand on my shoulder like she was presenting a slightly disappointing dog at a show and said, "And this is Brennan's little wife. She's in the cleaning business." She paused for the laugh. "Aren't we all glad someone has to do it?" One of her friends, a man with the soft pink hands of someone who'd never worked a day, chuckled and said, "Well, my dear, somebody's got to keep the lights on for the rest of us." And I smiled and I said, "Funny you should put it that way." A waiter passed with a tray. I knew him. His name was Marco and I promoted him to floor lead the month before. I caught his eye and gave him the smallest nod, and he gave me the smallest nod back. And his mother saw it and frowned, that flicker of confusion when the world does something it isn't supposed to. "Do you know the staff?" she asked, half a laugh in it. "I know all of them," I said. "I hired them." The pink-handed man laughed again, uncertainly. His mother's smile started doing something complicated. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was something closer to grief, because I'd wanted so badly for it not to have to come to this. I'd wanted to be liked for the $11 and a busted van version of me, the one nobody at that party would ever respect. "The catering company," I said, keeping my voice pleasant, conversational, the voice I use when I'm closing a deal. "Meridian Hospitality Group. You book them through the venue. Lovely company. I should know. I own it. Silence has a temperature. This one dropped about 40 degrees. I own the staffing company that placed every server in this room," I went on, "and the facilities group that's managing the load-in and load-out, and the bar service. It's all one parent company. Mine. I built it from a single van when I was 24. I turned to her and I made sure my voice stayed soft, because soft is what lands. So when you told your friends I clean toilets, you were almost right. I started by cleaning them myself. The difference is now 400 people clean them for me, and they all have health insurance, which is more than I can say for the way you treat the people who serve you." The pink-handed man had gone the color of his hands. The friends had developed a sudden interest in their drinks. And then I did the part I'm not proud of, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't savor it. "There's also the matter of the overage," I said. "On the contract, the $38,000 in custom additions you requested but didn't fully fund. You signed a personal guarantee. I have it on my phone." I let that sit for exactly one breath. "I'm not going to call it tonight. It's your son's wedding, and your son is a good man, which is a miracle considering. But I want you to understand something. For the last year, I have been someone you could afford to be cruel to, because you thought I had nothing and you had everything. You had that exactly backwards. And the only reason your champagne tower didn't get pulled off the truck this morning is that I decided your son deserved a nice day more than I deserved an easy one." She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. For the first time since I'd met her, her mouth was just a mouth, not a weapon. Brennan had come up behind me somewhere in the middle of it. I felt his hand find the small of my back. I braced for it, the choosing, the same way he'd chosen silence at the rehearsal dinner. But he leaned down and into my ear, quiet enough that only I could hear. He said, $11,000 and a busted van. God, I love you. Why didn't you ever tell me?" And I turned and looked at him and realized he wasn't asking the question his mother would have asked, which was how much. He was asking the question that meant he was hurt I hadn't trusted him with the hard version of myself. The version with the cracked hands and the kitchen table payroll and the dead mother and the gold sparrow on her wrist. "Because," I said, and my voice finally cracked, "the only time all weekend. Everybody who finds out gets nicer. And I needed at least one person who was just nice." He pulled me into him right there in the middle of the cocktail hour, and his mother watched her son hold the woman she'd tried to send to the kitchen, and I think that was the moment she actually lost. Not the money. The money she could replace. She lost the story she'd been telling about her own family, the one where she was at the top of it. We didn't make a scene after that. I'm not built for scenes. I let the reception go on. The food was extraordinary because my people are extraordinary. I tipped the staff out of my own pocket that night. Doubled, because it was my family wedding too now, in a way, and I take care of family. His mother left early, pleading a headache. Before she went, she came and found me by the dessert table. I thought she might apologize. She didn't, not really. People like her don't have the muscle for it. But she looked at my wrist, at the thin gold bracelet with the little enamel sparrow, and something moved across her face. "That's a charming little piece," she said. "Was it expensive?" And I understood her, finally, completely. She had spent her whole life unable to see the value of anything that didn't come with the price she could repeat at parties. "It's worth more than everything you own," I told her. "It just doesn't appraise." I never did call in the 38,000. I forgave it as a wedding gift in writing, on letterhead, so she'd have to keep the piece of paper that said I'd been generous to her. That was the only revenge I actually wanted. Not to take from her. To be, on the record, the bigger person she'd assumed I was too poor to afford to be. Brennan and I have been married 3 years now. His mother and I exist in a state of armed, polite truce. She's never once slid my plate away again. At Thanksgiving last year, she introduced me to a new neighbor as my daughter-in-law who runs her own company, and the word own came out of her like a tooth she didn't want to lose, and I let her keep it as a win, because I can afford to. My sister-in-law, the Worcestershire one, actually came around. She manages one of my regional offices now. Turns out she'd hated the whole performance of that family her entire life and was just relieved to find out somebody had quietly opted out and built a door. And the sparrow still doesn't appraise. I still wear it every single day. Some mornings I catch it on my wrist in the mirror before a board meeting, that little enamel bird my mother bought herself the first month she ever made a dollar of her own, and I think about her cracked hands and her flower stand and the fact that she never, not once, needed anybody at any table to tell her she belonged there. Neither, it turns out, do I. What I keep coming back to is how close I came to being the smaller person while telling myself I was being the bigger one. For a whole year, I let my future mother-in-law decide what I was worth, and the only reason it ended the way it did wasn't luck. It was 3 things I built, long before I ever met that family, back at a kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a busted van in the driveway. The first was the line I refused to cross, even when she handed me every excuse to cross it. I had her signature on $38,000. I could have pulled the champagne tower off the truck and humiliated her at her own son's wedding, and a part of me wanted to, but I'd learned a long time ago, watching my mother run her flower stand with cracked hands, that the people you take care of are the ones who tell you the truth, and the people you punish just learn to hide from you. Forgiving that debt in writing, on letterhead, wasn't weakness. It was me deciding who I was going to be in that family for the next 30 years, on purpose, where she couldn't take it back. The second was knowing when to stay quiet. I didn't reveal who I was at the rehearsal dinner when the wound was fresh and I was shaking in a restroom. I waited. I pulled the document. I confirmed the facts. I let cocktail hour come to me. Cruelty makes people loud and reckless. The skill I'd built running 400 employees was the patience to let other people show you exactly who they are before you ever show them who you are. Brennan's mother told her whole truth in 1 sentence about the kitchen. I just had to not interrupt her. The third was the part nobody saw, the $11,000. The years of payroll. I didn't understand at first and taught myself anyway. The clients I had to fire when I was broke. By the time anyone tried to make me feel small at a dinner table, I had already survived things that made a sneer over scallops look like nothing. You can't shame a person who has already done the hard, unglamorous, unwitnessed work of becoming themselves. That's the only armor that actually holds. If you take one thing from what happened to me, let it be this. Protect the version of you that nobody's clapping for, the one putting in the quiet hours with no audience, because that's the version that pays for every good moment later. Be the kind of person who could ruin someone and chooses not to, not because they don't deserve it, but because you'd rather not become them. And when somebody tries to tell you where you belong, don't argue. Just keep building the door the way my mother did, the way I did, until one day you realize you stop needing anyone's permission to walk through it. The sparrow still doesn't appraise, neither do I. And I finally understand that was never a problem.